Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 7 of the AFL season was just about the polar opposite of round 6. We were all so gripped by the countless tight games last week, and then this week, celebrating the great Anzac Day, well, we just had blowout after blowout, didn't we? Last week we had 5 games decided by less than 10 points. This week we only had 1 and had 5 decided by 50 points or more, plus a 49-point margin to go with it. More blowouts means more lopsided fantasy scoring, so some teams really feasted this week. Looking at St Kilda and Port Adelaide, who both had 7 players ton up. Brisbane and Hawthorn had 6, and if you owned a bunch of players from across those 4 sides, I dare say you had a pretty good weekend results-wise. My weekend was reasonable, had a mixed bag of wins and losses across all of my comps, and I was more than happy with the debut of Tristan Xerri for my home league. I traded him in a few weeks ago, giving up Max Gawn, and I have been eagerly awaiting his first game for me, so much so that I put the captain's armband on him and wasn't disappointed. You could say he's been a real ray of sunshine for what has been a gloomy couple of weeks for my team. Now, I promise not to make a habit of whinging, but I will whinge just one last time on the luck I'm having in the Shiva DT comp. So Shiva DT is the single season draft that I'm playing in that has over 70 leagues, and it's a promotion relegation system. Lots of fun. If you've never heard of it, never played it before, get involved next year. It's good fun. Although, is it really that fun? I'm in Div 17, so shout out to everyone in that league who is listening. And I'm sitting dead last. Dead last. So 12th. With 1 win, 6 losses. However, if we were to look at the ladder from points scored, which I may do from time to time, I'm 5th. So 5th for points scored, sitting 12th on the ladder. Yeah, that's my little whinge. Let's move on, shall we? This week's episode of Finders Keepers will run pretty much as the others do. I'll start by looking back at the top waiver picks I suggested last week, and then I'll give you my thoughts on the best guys to grab for this week. I'll then go through the round, pointing out the things that stood out to me that I noticed, and then I'll finish with some questions from the listeners. Got some really good ones this week, so looking forward to getting stuck into that. So firstly, let's have a look at the top waiver picks that I suggested last week. Now, I ended up just giving 7 names instead of 5 for regular leagues and 5 for deep leagues. I just combined them all and went with 7. So I'll run through this quickly. Actually, I will get through this quickly because not many of them went too well. Number 1 was a bit of a shock, but I did suggest Liam Reedy would be the main man to grab because I knew he'd be Carlton's number 1 ruck. At the time, he was owned in 43% of Keeper and Dynasty leagues on the Keeper AFL platform. He's up to 60%, and I tell you, if you grabbed him, you'd be pretty happy with it. He scored a 75, and he was up against the almost unplayable Luke Jackson and the experienced Mason Cox, put up a 75, and he had 22 hitouts, but he had 12 hitouts to advantage, and that was actually the 4th highest from any ruckman in the league for the round. So, good start if you grab Reedy. The question now is, if Pitnet's fit, does he come back in and they share, or I don't know what they do. But I like Reedy. We'll see what happens. Number 2, I put Cam Zurhaar in there. He was only owned in 25% of leagues, but he had a big role change last week, moving to the halfback flank for the Roos, scoring 113. That saw his ownership go right up to 71%, and he started this week in that role before being moved to the forward line as the game went on, and he scored a 51. So I think those who took the punt, it made sense. But geez, if that role's not going to stick for more than a week and a half, it's probably not something you can rely on anytime soon. Number 3, I had Charlie Edwards, who had debuted for the Crows. His ownership actually hasn't changed. It was 42% and remains so. It was a great debut. I really like the look of him. This week, a much tougher game against the Lions, and they smashed Adelaide. So he looked a bit more nervy this week. It looked like this was his first game, and last week wasn't. So I don't know. He kept his spot with Dawson in. I'm a bit worried he'll be one of a few Crows who don't get up for the showdown next week. Number 4, Lockie Cowan, 56%, and it remains at 56%. So clearly no one has taken my advice last week, and with good reason. He dropped down to a 44 again this week, and I think the evidence is starting to pile up that maybe Cowan, he's just not going to be it in the fantasy world. Maybe just not yet. Maybe he needs a change of coach or something different. But to drop back down to a 44 after teasing with an 84 last week, pretty disappointing. Number 5, I had Colton Tolstrup for the D's. He's had a really nice role change the last couple of weeks, which has helped him get more of the footy. He went from an ownership of 27% up to 40%. He was much quieter this week, just scored 43. He did still take the most kick-ins for Melbourne, which is interesting. It's just that Richmond only kicked 6 of them in the game. Number 6, Phoenix Gothard. He went from 36% ownership to 57 on the back of his 99 last week. He only scored a 36, was super quiet this week, but the role he plays and being his first year of actually playing, I think it's to be expected there'll be down weeks. Number 7 was the last one. I had Ethan Reid. For Gold Coast, his percentage has gone up by 1%, 55 to 56%. And I was pretty big on him. He scored 73 last week playing, a unique sort of wing role. But he went straight back down again this week to a 36. I think he had the same role. I just don't think he was involved in the game very much at all. So out of the 7, I reckon there's probably only 2, maybe 3 I'd keep. And that would be Reedy, Edwards, and I reckon Tolstrup. It depends on your league, obviously. Gothard you could keep. But yeah, I'm a bit worried about Cowan. So what about this week? Well, I'll use the usual structure that I do. I'll give you some names for regular leagues, and then I'll have a look at some deeper leagues. So I've got 4 names that are likely to be available, and I'll see how we go this week. Hopefully a bit better. Number 1, I see a lot of people trying to get this guy, Patrick Richko for Richmond, the largely unknown former Cat who was traded last year. Debuted last week, looked okay on the wing with a 65, and then this week really stepped it up. And I don't know if it's because Jaden Short was out and Sam Banks were out, and he took up a bit more of the halfback sort of wing role, but he was huge. He scored a 91, and he's only owned in 35% of leagues. He's a mid only, 20 years old, but that was a very eye-catching performance, I think, for the fantasy world. Number 2 could be a bit of a surprise, but I reckon Will Setterfield will come back to the senior squad for Essendon this week. He's owned in 53% of leagues, hasn't played yet this year, had a long injury in the summer, and he's always been injured. But the thing about Setterfield is when he's not injured, he's often playing, and when he's playing, he's scoring. So in his 3 years as a Bomber, he's averaged 92, 99, 96. Has only managed, I think, most games, like 13 in a season in that time. But didn't play last week. He's had a couple of weeks in the VFL, had 25 touches, 8 clearances in the 2s, and Essendon were absolutely whacked by Collingwood. So I reckon we'll see Setterfield this week, and he'll be sitting in, 47% of leagues. He'll be sitting there. So go grab him, I reckon. Number 3, I really like Mac Andrew. He's owned in 63% of leagues, so it's a pretty high ownership for this segment. But I just like the last couple of weeks they've used him as a bit of a chop out in the ruck, and he scored a very nice 96 on the weekend, playing a bit of wing, defender, bit of ruck time. He's a very impressive unit, and I think he's going to be a fantasy asset one day. He's only 22, but I reckon jump on if you like what you saw last week. And then number 4, Jack Carroll for the Saints, owned in 33% of leagues. He bobbed up with his first ton at 106, and it's interesting, he would have been really popular in the redrafts in preseason. Didn't really set the world on fire with his scoring, so has probably been cut loose by a few, but that role seems to have stuck, playing at halfback. And this was a week where, yes, they beat up on the Eagles, but he showed he can get it, and he got the ton. So there's my 4. How about for the deeper leagues? I've got another 4 names. Let's go through them. Number 1, Corey Wagner for Freo. Now, he's 29 years old. He's not a spring chicken. He's been there for a while and has always had signs of fantasy prowess. He's owned in 27% of leagues. He scored 104 on the weekend, which is great, but he's actually gone at 81 in his last 3 and 78 in his last 5. So he's playing a pretty nice role for the Dockers at the minute. Freo are a bit of a hard-to-read team in terms of fantasy and who's going to be consistently scoring, but he's having a good run and is worth a spot in your back line. Number 2, I'll run with Tom Brown for Richmond. Owned in 21% of leagues. His scoring before the weekend was not fieldable, but I remember in the last year or two hearing a couple of times he's one of the guys that could take over from Jaden Short. Now, last year it was Sam Banks who clearly had that role. This year Banks has gone up to the wing, and obviously Short is just still doing what he does. But with Short out and Banks out, Brown put up a 94. So pretty impressive score from him, and I wonder if it continues. Number 3, I've got Lincoln McCarthy, 32 years old, coming back from, I think it was an ACL, and it's just great to see him back in that Brisbane lineup. But we did see in the preseason he was training off half back at times, and up until this weekend I don't think we've really seen it. But this week was very impressive. He's only owned in 13% of leagues, played at half back against the Crows this week and racked. Scored a 118 thanks to 23 touches, which included 20 kicks and 12 marks. I'm not all that convinced he's going to be that reliable in the role. We saw what just happened with Cam Zurhaar, but this was an impressive effort from him. I just wonder if it was more about the opposition, because the Crows really did let the Lions dominate possession. And number 4, the last one for the deeper leagues, I just really like the look of Roan Steele for Collingwood. He's he's not that young. He's 24-year-old. Plays on the wing, owned in 18% of leagues, is mid-only, so there's no real obvious attraction in terms of the keeper world, but I don't know, I just like watching him. There's something about him, and he's put together back-to-back 70s now, including 74 on Anzac Day. So I reckon in a very deep league, he's worth grabbing as someone you could potentially field as your last mid, but more importantly, sit on him for another couple of years and see what he can turn into. Because if he turns into his namesake over at Melbourne, well, you will be laughing. So there's my 8 names for this week. Good luck with your waiver picks. I hope one of those names was helpful for you and you can snag them. All right, let's take a look back now at round 7 and the things I noticed from a keeper league perspective, starting all the way back on Thursday night with the Bulldogs and Sydney doing battle. And considering how undermanned they are, I thought the Bulldogs put up a good fight early, but that Sydney sizzle continued for another week. They are looking ominous and ended up winning by 11 goals, if you don't mind. For the Doggies, Adam Treloar finally made his first appearance for the year after some really good form in the VFL. He had a pretty good start, I thought, slowed in the second half, ended up with an 80, which with his forward status is pretty solid. Maybe not what you were hoping for if you've been waiting all year for him, but it's a good start. I found his choice of hairstyle very curious. He's rocking a mullet at the minute, so not sure what that's about. Maybe he lost a bet. Yeah. Anyway, Lockie Smith debuted to help in the ruck with Louis Emmett, and the two of them did okay. Smith scored 58, Emmett with a 61. But up against Grundy, I mean, it's just clear that the doggies really need Tim English to return, and I think he might be a chance this week. So we'll wait and see there. For Sydney, Charlie Curnow put up a game that maybe the Swans fans have been just waiting for, because he's been okay without being spectacular, but he was definitely spectacular in this one. Put up a 115, kicked a nice bag of 7 goals, and I don't know, I just get the feeling this is just the beginning for Curnow as a Swan. I think he's destined for some big things in the red and white, and this could just be the start of it. Jai Sarong is another name I want to mention. He bobbed up with an 80. He's averaging 72 now. He's been more than just a bit of a surprise. Sort of like a key defender type. Couldn't really get going at Hawthorn. Has come across to the Swans and he's now playing on a wing. And he looks excellent. And, you know, he's not just getting numbers, getting the pill. He's contributing and he's a big part of their chains. It's a great pickup for the Swans. Now, they did have a couple of debutants in this game. One I was more excited about than the other, and it ended up being the other that was more impressive. So Billy Cootie was the first one. He scored 38, kicked a nice goal, just didn't really get going. But I was really optimistic on him, just his form in the VFL in the last few years, being a mature age recruit for the Swans. This year, and then Will Edwards was the other one. He only scored 48, but he looks unreal. Like a really big, hulking sort of body shape, but moves really well and goes hard at the ball. Maybe hard at the man as well. I think he was the one that may have clattered into Norton when he went down with that awful head injury. But anyway, Cootie, I think, will probably be out of the side straight away, particularly if Heaney gets up. But I reckon Will Edwards did enough to say we'll get another look at him. Friday night, we saw the traditional blockbuster between Richmond and Melbourne for Anzac Day Eve. And I think Tigers were with them for a bit, but yeah, Melbourne far too good on the night. For Richmond, I spoke about Rechko in the waiver segment. It's an impressive second game and just looked to pick up a fair bit of the ball left behind by Banks and Short, who were out. Banks out long term, I think 5-6 weeks. Jaden Short was a laid out because his wife had gone into labour. So congratulations to the Short family. Pretty exciting stuff. Tom Brown, I also spoke about him earlier. He just has this ability to score in the right role, and it just feels like he got that on the weekend. Sam Cumming made an exciting debut that Tigers fans were looking forward to. I thought he looked okay in a pretty tough game. He scored a 58. I think I saw he kicked a goal as well. So okay without anything too exciting. Over to Melbourne, they had a big night. Interestingly, they only used 4 midfielders for the game at the centre ball up, so not including the rucks, obviously. Only 4. It was Steele, Pickett, Windsor and Sparrow. And it went pretty well. Keziah Pickett, wow. This guy just keeps going to new levels, doesn't he? He put up a 131 from 29 touches and only had 2 handballs. So he was just kicking it at every opportunity. Now, he kicked 4 goals as well. 4 goals from midfield, which isn't all that unusual for him. Last year, playing as a mid, he kicked 5 on 3 occasions from the midfield. Dude is an absolute jet. Caleb Windsor put up an 88, and I really liked his game. I saw some things from him that maybe I hadn't realised about him, and that's that ability to burst out of stoppage and even at the centre ball ups, just to get the ball and get through everyone. It's really starting to show, and it's really starting to, I guess, explain why Melbourne have been adamant that he is a centre bounce midfielder. So great signs for him. Great signs for Tom Sparrow as well. He scored a 119. That's his third ton for the year. And I don't want to put the moz on him. I've got him in a couple of leagues, but this looks to be a legitimate midfield breakout from him, doesn't it? He had a couple of pop scores earlier in the year, but he's gone on with it. And what's that? Yeah, 3 tons out of his 7 games. It's pretty good stuff. Now, again, Melbourne, another very interesting thing to take out of this game, maybe the biggest, was the way they used Max Gawn with Max Heath in the side. So last week Heath came in, only played around 27% time on ground, but it was enough for Max Gawn to not score a ton and not take a mark. Could have been a coincidence, but this week was really interesting. The ruck split was pretty even. So they had, for ruck contests around the ground, Gawn was at 53% and Max Heath 47%. And then for CBAs, it was 55-45. So it's pretty much a 50-50 split for rucking for the whole game, meaning Gawn was able to play forward a lot more. It's interesting because Gawn was struggling. He copped a knock as well, but being the legend that he is, found his way to score a 92. And Heath put up 50 for what it's worth. But it's something I've wondered for a while about Melbourne and Gawn and the fact that they don't have someone to help him. Now Heath's got a couple of games under his belt. I wonder if this is the beginning of Gawn finally starting to just go backwards a bit. Time will tell. On to Saturday, we had heaps of footy on Saturday. It was great, although none of them ended up being close games. The first one was Hawthorn Gold Coast down in Tassie, and I thought this was a really good test for the Suns to win a tough away game like that. And they were okay in patches, but ultimately they just weren't up to it, and Hawks were too good. I didn't really have anything to say about the Hawks. I guess Lloyd Meek continues to impress with his scoring from such low time on ground, but I kind of talk about that every week, so I didn't put that in the notes, but I did talk about it, so there you go. For the Gold Coast, Will Powell, he's had a pretty cool year because he's gone into the midfield, but this was the second time this year he hasn't played midfield, and his scoring has suffered immensely. So he saved his score. He got to 68 thanks to a really big second half, but he didn't attend any of the centre ball ups because he was doing a defensive job on Nick Watson. So, yeah, a bit of a worry. I mean, I don't know how many of us thought the Will Powell midfield role would continue long term, particularly when the Suns got all their soldiers back, but he was looking really good in there. I wonder if this was, again, just a bit of a once-off that was match-up dependent. So we'll see next week where he goes. And Mac Andrew, I spoke about in the waivers, just a really nice 96 from him. Continues to see a little bit of extra ruck time helping out Jared Witts there. Essendon Collingwood, the big Anzac Day clash. Essendon were with them for 1 quarter, 2 quarters, and then Collingwood just went ape. Ended up posting a really big win. For the Bombers, Jai Caldwell continues to flummox and disappoint me. 73 was his score. He only attended 25% of the centre ball ups. So there was 8. He was only at 8 for the whole game. I don't know what's going on with him. He was back to his... he scored a ton last week. I thought he's back, but no idea what's going on with that guy. I thought he could be potentially the number 1 scoring mid this year. Way off. Kyle Langford, he just continues scoring with this lovely little, I don't know, it's like a wing roll, half back, half forward. He sort of rolls up and down. But he's doing it for 3 weeks now. He scored 89 in this big loss, and he's now averaging 88 in that time. Pretty handy. For Collingwood, well, geez, it was a big day for the Pies. The Dacos boys went absolutely ham. But the two guys I want to talk about, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but Scott Pendlebury. I mean, I'm not sure what more accolades can be laid upon this man, but to have a career-high 43 disposals in game 431 is just nothing short of outstanding. So he scored a 153, which is just would have decided so many draft comps, keeper and draft, this week, and he just keeps doing it, doesn't he? So not sure what else to say. He won the medal. I think that was the 4th time he's won the Anzac Day medal. Just an out-and-out superstar of the game. Now, speaking of which, I've been wanting to give this guy his due for a bit. Jack Crisp. And I'm talking about him because he joined in with Pendles. He had a whopping game, 127. But he's now played 269 consecutive games. And he broke the record last year, which was held by Jim Steins. And I remember as a kid when Jim Steins broke that record, it just blew me away that a player could play for 10 years without missing. And now Jack Crisp has not only beaten that record, he's just still going and playing really good footy. It's incredible when you think of the modern game, the demands on the body, the amount of training they do. It's a phenomenal effort, and long may it continue. Lastly, Rowan Steele, I did give him a mention in the waivers. Just a couple of 70s in a row, building nicely. 24 years old, he's a good age. Just keep an eye on him. Port Adelaide Geelong was the early night game of the doubleheader, and I was looking forward to this. I thought it'd be a pretty good contest, but Port Adelaide absolutely smashed them. I mean, the margin was only 5 goals in the end, but no, from start to finish, this was all Port Adelaide. Very impressive, and I don't know what the story was with the Cats. I think they're entitled to have a down game every now and then. They're always up and about. For Port Adelaide, Joe Richards, he scored a ton. He scored 106 in this game. Now, he's tonned up twice this year, and it was both times Port Adelaide have had easy wins. So I feel like he's definitely getting going when they're smashing teams. But I really like him. I like the role he's playing, and I like his tackling numbers. He's averaging 4 tackles a game, which is probably not something I expected from someone who plays his role. Jason Horne-Francis has now put back-to-back 120s on the board, and he hit 120. In fact, it's the 3rd time he's gone over 120 this year. And there's something really building with Horne-Francis at the minute. He had the slower start, played a bit more forward, but in games where he's over 50% centre ball up attendances, he's averaging 115 in those 4 games. So yeah, it's pretty good. If you think they're going to continue with him in the guts, and with Rosie out, I don't see why anything changes there. Looks like he's really breaking out as a big scorer. Tanner Bruhn, so for Geelong, Tanner Bruhn was, with Ocean Mullen doing the hard tag on Butters, it once again meant Bruhn played in the back line and not on the ball, which I found curious last week, but it just seems to make sense. When Mullen's doing his thing, Bruhn goes to the half back line. Worked out all right, put up a 106. Just continues his fine return to the game this season. And then lastly, James Worpel, I reckon his spot in the side's starting to look a bit shaky, which isn't all that surprising because he played in the first game, got injured, and then was fit but not named. So he had to work his way back in. Now he's back in. He scored 47 in this game, spent time forward, only attended 22% of the CBAs. And yeah, if I was an owner, I'd be a bit nervous because I reckon there's a good chance he's in the VFL this week. The other Saturday night game was Freo and Carlton, and we had our first close game of the round, but really it was only close because Carlton kicked a whole bunch of goals at the end. I think the margin was around 2 goals. Anyway, Freo looked pretty good. Shai Bolton had an absolute ripper, and owners will be wondering where the heck that's been the last few weeks. He scored 138, but that's thanks to 58 points in the last quarter. It was huge. Laid 8 tackles, which is really important because in his quieter weeks where he was scoring those 60s, he was still playing on the ball, still getting the footy, just not laying tackles, not taking marks. So this is much more what we want to see from Bolton. Luke Jackson continues running hot with Sean Darcy out of the side. He put up a 135, and look, he's got Mason Cox for support, but Cox played more forward. This was Jackson's ruck spot, and he absolutely smashed it and continues to with Darcy out. Judd McVie scored 81. That's back-to-back 80s for him, and I was quite bullish on him ahead of this year. I thought he wasn't going to be that lockdown guy and he'd be free to get more of the footy. Hasn't panned out that way so far, but 2 weeks in a row he's looked all right, and maybe they're starting to use him a bit more on the way out of that back 50. For Carlton, Cooper Lord, he was in, and I've been calling for them to put him in the middle on the ball, not just wing and at stoppage. Like, when he has CBAs, he scores really well. But they did this week. They put him in there to tag Caleb Sarong, and he kept Sarong reasonably quiet. He only scored 67 himself, though, so I don't know if I like him tagging, but hey, at least if he's around the ball, he's a chance. And then Liam Reedy, who I talked about in my waiver recap. First game as the solo ruck, did okay, I reckon, up against Jackson and Cox. And those 12 hitouts to advantage, I think, were pretty telling. So see what happens this week if Pitnet's back, but I reckon Reedy's earned himself a little bit of a run in the side. Sunday footy, and we had St Kilda and West Coast, the first game at Marvel. And I was tracking this game, and Saints were always ahead. They were winning quite nicely, but I don't know, things really escalated when I wasn't tracking, because the next time I looked, St Kilda had won by 100 points. So, yeah, obviously the second half they really got going. Some names, there's a few names for the Saints worth mentioning, and a quick shout out, Callum Wilkie. Just, wow, he keeps doing it. He's gone another 123. He's the number one averaging defender, and I keep thinking he can't keep going with this, but he is. He's averaging 12 marks a game and is yet to see the pine. That is 100% time on ground in every game. What more could you want in a fantasy gun? There's nothing more annoying than when your guy is on fire and then you see him trotting off to the bench for his rotation. Not big cow Wilkie. Dude just plays and plays and plays. Rowan Marshall put up another decent score with a 50-50 ruck split with De Koning. He went at 77 to go with his ton last week. I'm not sure if he's starting to get going. It's really hard to know. The ruck split is just hurting both him and De Koning, and I think, with De Koning was possibly going to miss this week after an injury. I just feel like that's the only way one of them is going to finally start performing, if one of them is out. Hugo Garcia put up a 112 following Harley Reid all over the place. And it was a big score, not just because the Saints won big, because there's a lot of names that probably got a bit of a lick of the lollipop, as they say, because Saints were smashing them. But Garcia's done this. We've scored over 93 weeks in a row now. And this week he had the 32 touches, kicked 2 goals, all while keeping Harley Reid quiet. He's really performing, Garcia. He's really breaking out as a reliable midfielder, not a fringe guy. So, yeah, I reckon having shares in him in a keeper league would be pretty good. Brad Hill deserves a mention just because he just keeps getting it done. I mean, Another 100 on the weekend, a 102. He's averaging 93, and I just think about how many leagues would have had him in their redraft in the preseason, and just how stoked you'd be if you're a contending side and you nab Brad Hill with the forward status, knowing that he's pretty up and down, not reliable at all. And now he's averaging 93. He's a genius pickup. Darcy Wilson had another game playing on the ball and another good score with an 89. And yeah, I talked a bit about him last week in the role on the ball, how a bit like Windsor for the Ds. I wasn't sure if Wilson would be a CBA guy just at this point of his career, but 2 weeks in a row they've given it to him and he's delivered. For the Eagles, well, their best performers were a couple of 18-year-olds, I think, or first years anyway. Willem Dersma put up his first fantasy ton, first of many, I'm sure those who grabbed him in the draft will be hoping. This was his biggest midfield game, and he was running with Wanganeen Miller. So I feel like, I didn't watch any of this game, it does feel like West Coast got to a point where they're like, look, we're getting smashed. Let's give Dersma a bit of a first-hand look at what an elite midfielder looks like in Naz. And yeah, he got a ton to go with the lesson. So good result on a pretty average, dark day for the Eagles. Josh Lindsay was the other one. This was the first time he collected over 30 touches in a game. He scored 97 with that, beautiful halfback role and was the main kick-in taker as well. So good signs for owners of Lindsay as well. Brisbane Adelaide is the next game on Sunday, and this was looking like being a pretty good game, and I think it was for the first half. But as a Crows fan, it felt like even though we were hanging in there on the scoreboard, we weren't in the game, and it did feel like Brisbane were going to really get going and ran over the top of the Crows, unfortunately for me. But for Brisbane, great performance, and they needed it because they dropped that one last week. Now, I spoke about Pendlebury earlier as a veteran racking up over 40 touches. Lachie Neale did the same. He had an absolute field day. 42 touches and 13 marks for a fantasy score of 159. Incredible stuff. And don't you just love these older guys just still getting it done? Just shows you how good they are. Zach Bailey had a really big and important bounce back for owners from his horror 39 score last week. 29 touches, kicked 3 goals, had some midfield time, just did as he pleased on the way to a 127. Sammy Draper, now he didn't put up a big score, he scored 67, but what I really liked for Draper owners was last week Darcy Fort was a laid out, so Draper was the number 1 ruck, and he was pretty poor against Gawn. This week Darcy Fort's back in, Draper was still the number 1 man when you look at the ruck splits. So 67, nothing exciting there. But if you've got Draper in a keeper and you're starting to think he might be a really important guy for me because he'll lose forward status, eventually you'd think, this was a good sign that Brisbane are going to trust him in that role. For Adelaide, Max Michelani put up a 90, which is his best score since round 8 last year. And I did notice him a lot more in this game, all over the ground. He was definitely up the ground more than usual. I don't know if that means he was playing a bit of wing, or did he sort of start to go forward a bit? Not sure exactly, but don't know. I don't know if I trust it and think that he's going to start scoring all of a sudden. But I do know he's such a good player, and they do like the footy in his hands. If he's not locking down on someone, he could be a fantasy guy. So I guess just keep an eye on him this week. Isaac Rankin scored 89. Not his best game of the year. The 2 goals he kicked were absolute gems. But his CBAs rose to 41%, which was the highest so far this year. And that's certainly the thing that stood out to me, that he was back in the middle a lot more this week. And I think for the Crows to do well and from here, he needs to be around the ball. Jordan Dawson returned, and it was just great to see him back out there. That goal he kicked that Tex set him up for, and the embrace. It was great. Really nice scenes. But yeah, good for the Crows to have the captain back. He played a little bit everywhere, all over the ground. Scored a 116, and look, if anything, it just reminded me how much we really do still rely on him as the man. But yeah, great to see him back out there. And lastly, Lachlan McAndrew just keeps going for the Crows as the new number one ruck. He put up an 84, which is a really nice score considering he didn't take any marks. So I had a look at how's he building his scores. Obviously, hitouts are the main category, but he averages 5 tackles a game, which is pretty impressive for a big man. The only thing is, for him to go to the next level and be exactly what the Crows need in a ruck, and to help those keeper league owners, he needs to start taking more marks. He took none in this game, as I said, and his best return has been 3 marks in a game. He's done that twice this year. So a bit harsh. He's only just in the role, but that's just the thing he needs to improve on. But apart from that, he's been probably the brightest light at the Crows so far this year. And then lastly, the round finished quite aptly with the closest game of the round, with GWS just beating North in a very entertaining game to finish it off. North really unlucky not to have had a chance to maybe win it, but yeah, they just fell short. For the Giants, Lika Lear played some more ruck time this week. He did it last week, and I kind of thought it was a one-off, but he did it again. They used Nick Madden more around the ground, but it was basically a 50-50 split for the CBAs. So Lear scored his 70. He becomes relevant if he's helping out in the ruck. And yeah, we'll see if that continues. Toby Green had another nice scoring game with a 109, and he's just quietly going about having a solid season, isn't he? Averaging 85, a couple of tons in his last 3, and playing a heap of midfield. Pretty good. For North, Tristan Cherry was always going to return with a bang after 3 weeks off with that suspension, and it was a bang indeed that he returned with. 25 touches and 12 tackles is some pretty impressive stats, and it just means when he builds a score like that, his hitouts are just an added scoring bonus. So a 145 from the X-Man, good to have him back. Jai Simpkin, in recent weeks, has been playing on the ball because he's been tagging. Now this week, Finn O'Sullivan returned to tag Finn Callahan, which pushed Simpkin back to the wing. Now, Simpkin ran with Lockie Ash at times, I think, in the second half, but a bit of not a surprise, but a bit of a disappointment that Simpkin looked like he was on the ball again and was tagging, but they like O'Sullivan in that role clearly a lot more. Simpkin finished with a 76, and I guess we'll see where he lands in the next few weeks in the context of that North Melbourne midfield. And lastly, to finish off, last week's hype guy, Cam Zurhaar. Oh boy, did not continue, did he? He actually started in the back line, but they just rolled him forward for whatever reason. Scored a 51, and I just wrote in the notes, no good. I mentioned at the start of the pod that I've got a few really good listener questions that have come in this week, so I'll get into them in a moment. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, or even any Keeper League trades that have gone down that you want me to talk about on the pod and analyse, make sure you drop me a line on X at FindKeepAFL. Go find the page, give it a like, and any questions you've got about Keeper Leagues, Dynasty Leagues, even Draft Leagues, just anything footy-wise, whatever. Let me know and I'll get to it on next week's episode. And if you are enjoying the podcast, of course, please make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening. A 5-star review wouldn't go astray if you're feeling generous. Actually, I had a couple of comments on the Spotify, on the podcast on Spotify. I didn't know you could do comments on there. So much appreciation to Matt Wheatley and Oh My God Fridge for your kind words. And glad you're enjoying the podcast, guys. Alrighty, to this week's questions, let's jump in. I've got, a good one from @thecartonblues on X. And the question is about Joel Jeffrey. What has happened to Joel Jeffrey's role? He dominated the first 3 rounds, then his scoring fell off a cliff, and now he's dropped. So he was dropped the week before this round. I'm not sure. I mean, I went and had a look at his scoring and tried to find any obvious sort of reasons for it to change. I guess the first thing I noticed, Carlton Blues, is he scored really well in those first few weeks in what was a few relatively easy wins against Geelong, West Coast and Richmond. So I reckon that might have helped potentially pad his scoring a bit. Bodie Yulin's form could be a factor too. He's really broken out in that halfback role as well. And we know Gold Coast have so many guys that can play that role and play it well. And then the last thing I thought I saw on Joel Jeffrey, he became a dad in the summer, in February, I think. So someone who's had newborns before, the sleeping patterns can be quite erratic. So maybe that's a bit of a long bow draw, but, there's a few possibilities explaining the form drop-off. I do think we'll see him back again. He's a pretty good player. Thanks for the question. Next one, got a couple here, and then it'll open up into a bit of a bigger conversation I want to have just quickly before I wrap things up. So this one is from @Ethan_Prendy on X. First question is about Jack Ross. Does Ross keep forward status like I'm expecting him to? Also, what the flip is wrong with Bergman? So I'll go through both those for you now, Ethan. Look, I'd be nervous as a Ross owner about his prospects because his midfield role has just been too consistent this year. We've seen him as a midfielder in years gone past, and then we've seen him sort of thrown forward again. I'm not seeing that so far this year, and he's playing really well. His CBA splits at the minute, he's sitting at 52%. And just with that young Richmond side, I reckon Ross will continue to play predominantly midfield and lose forward status for 2027. Now, Miles Bergman, he's been a real surprise. I really had high hopes for him this year. I'm sure many of us did, because we saw what he could do in that midfield role last year. But I think he was injured in pre-season, and I reckon he's been playing a little bit underdone, maybe even carrying something. But the worst part is there's no real clarity on his role. If he was playing a certain role, you could sort of say, well, that's why he's playing so poorly or whatever. But he's still being used here, there and everywhere, and certainly nowhere near the midfield time we kind of hoped for him. And I don't really see that changing just with the names that the Port have got there and the way Horne-Francis is performing. So, I don't know. What I would say about Bergman is he's a very good buy low candidate, because I was trying to get him off my brother in my home league late last year, and I was going to offer a fair bit. I won't now. So I'm thinking this could be a time to get him and then just hope that midfield role does eventuate for him. So thanks for the questions, Ethan. He's actually got another one, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about. He's asked about how do you handle an overflow of DPPs? So by that I mean you've got too many forward mids or defender mids to fill your forward and defender spots, and you're going to have to use some of them in the midfield. So with the recent DPP changes, specifically the industry standard ones where guys like Tuke Miller, Horn Francis picked up forward status, Ethan already had Petrarca, Cozzy Pickett, Jack Ross, guys like Braden Cook, DeGoey, Keys, Mackay. So he already had a pretty stacked, nice, juicy forward line. I'm assuming you've got 5 forwards on field. I'll just run with that. But since the DPPs, he's now added Tuke Miller, Horn Francis. So he did a trade. I can't remember what it was now. It was written down. He did a bit of a trade where he gave up a couple of okay forwards for a decent mid-only midfielder, which is a good way to do it. I mean, trading makes a lot of sense when you're in that position because there's something, and none of us really know why, but there's something just uncomfortable about fielding a DPP in the midfield. We really want to field him in the forward or back line because, I don't know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. It doesn't matter. It just matters if he scores. But it looks nicer for your team if your mids are mid-only and your forwards and defenders are the DPPs. So trading does make a lot of sense. Cashing in on a heavier forward line to bolster the midfield because it's really hard to find a mid-only guy that you could trust and you like on your field. So yes, trading is a good way to do it, but I guess I'd just say be careful. Even when you feel like you've got so many forwards or defenders, you really are just an injury or two away. Throw in a guy who's all of a sudden out of form from really wishing maybe you didn't do those trades or you didn't let those guys go. So I think it's hard, but the best bet, unless there's a really good deal you can do that really bolsters your midfield, particularly long term. I mean, one of the smartest trades you can do is trading a DPP forward mid who you know will lose forward status and will be of very little use to you next year. So you play it that way, it makes sense. And if you can bring in a captain for your midfield, of course. But don't force the issue. If you're stuck, and I use that word with inverted commas because stuck with too many DPPs forward or back is a good problem to have. But if you've got too many of them, just play them in the midfield for now. Don't worry about it. Just get them on the field, get them scoring points because so many of them next year are probably mid-only anyway. And as I said, if you quickly trade them all away or move them on, it doesn't take much for you to wish you had them back. So I hope that, definitely answers Ethan's question, but I guess I kind of wanted to go on a bit more detail around the different philosophies on how to play the game, how to trade, and when to just stick fat and not trade because you think you must cash in on someone. Hopefully that helps you in some way. It is a part of the game I do love to talk about, the art of trading and building that squad. But that'll do it. That will do it for another episode of Finders Keepers. And thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate all the listeners to this podcast. And with your support, I'm really motivated to just keep making this podcast as entertaining and relevant and helpful as it can possibly be for you and your many keeper and dynasty leagues. So that's a wrap. I will be back next week to look at round 8. Oh boy. That'll be a third of the season done. Can you believe that? So I'll be back next week to look at round 8. Hopefully it's a good one for you, and hopefully it's a good one for me too. We shall see. In the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.